Hello and most welcome to age 1920. It's a mere 80 left until the magnificent 2000. We will today continue with a thought-provoking article of Paul Feyerabend, Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations. It's one of the oldest articles we looked into so far. It's from 1955, so that in itself is rather interesting. Last time we looked into the mental reading process, looked at different examples to see whether it's really necessary that the MRP is present in every instance, or whether it is something that could participate but doesn't have to. Is it something that is a necessary attribute for saying reading is going on? Or would you rather say it can be present, which is rather a big difference? I compared as a quote here, does he say I'm being guided by letters because the mental content being guided is present? I think that is very close to the idea of imagining a CPU or a central processing unit for the mobiles of Pfeiffer that, so to speak, is inherent in them and make them move about, that they are the origin, the first movement. And of course, here we find connections both to original, we've discussed a lot, especially with Kalle Lundahl here, that the MRP, the mental reading process, is the true essence and the original of all and everything. The mighty and high essence. And it's rather interesting because this being guided it's an idea that's hard to get rid of. There's a good reason to dwell deeply into this with Wittgenstein. And Feyerabend does a thorough and careful job here. More and more we discover that the mental reading process has very little, if anything, to do with what reading is. From the act of reading, from the experience of reading, and I'd have to add also the knowledge of reading, which of course goes way back in time and involves much more of connections, depth, I'd say also fractality. There is a metaphorical comparison here. If I am supposed to describe how an object looks from afar, I don't make the description more accurate by saying what can be noticed about the object on closer inspection. That makes perfect sense. So if I read something, that is what's happening. Going deeper inside the spirit or the head to say that there is an original somewhere that can't be seen doesn't serve a purpose, actually can never be seen, and still it is the origin of everything. This is where it starts. The MRP is that mighty origin, the magnificent remembrance of presence, I would say, to use a Derridian analogy. Yeah, I did actually thought that out yesterday. Magnificent reminiscence of presence, MRP. I will continue where I left off. In 1918, page 459. And we started with a D example here. And it's whether the mental content is always present when a person is reading, and that therefore giving the criterion for a person reading cannot consist in pointing out a particular mental content. Now we shall show that even if there were a mental content which is present if and only if a person is reading, we could not take this content to be the essence of reading. Let us assume that mental content is the essence of reading, and that a person is reading if and only if this content, namely the MRP, is present. Will you make it a little bit bigger, 220 maybe, if you may? Thank you. We shall now show that the process characterized by the presence of the MRP cannot be reading. First of all, if reading is a particular experience, then it becomes quite unimportant whether or not you read according to some generally recognized alphabetical rule. One is reading if and only if he is experiencing the MRP. Nothing else is of any importance. Importance. That implies, however, that no distinction can be drawn between reading and believing that one is reading. Or to put it in another way, that anybody who believes that he is reading is entitled to infer he is reading. The important task of a teacher would therefore consist in schooling the receptivity of his pupils. Reading would be something like listening to inner voices in the presence of printed paper and acting in accordance with their advice. Advice. That different people who are reading the same text agree in the sounds they utter would be miraculous.
Miraculous.
Would be miraculous. Our assumption that reading is a mental act leads therefore to the substitution of miracles for an everyday affair. Affair. It leads also to the substitution for a simple process, uttering sounds in the presence of printed paper, of a more complicated one, listening to inner voices in the presence of printed paper. That is, it misses the aim of explaining the process of reading. Yes, it does. rather sharp. But does introducing inner voices really solve our problem? Namely, to explain why people read correctly and to justify our own reading of a text in a certain way. Usually, we simply read off the sound from the letters. Now, we want to be justified, and we think that mental content might justify our procedure. But if we do not trust the signs on the paper, then why should we trust the more ethereal advice of intuition or of the mental content, which is supposed to be the essence of reading? What conclusions are to be drawn from this analysis? First of all, it appears impossible to discover the essence of a thing in the way that is usually supposed. That is, T4 seems to be inapplicable. 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 But if that is the case, the correctness of the analysis can no longer be checked in the usual way. There's no criterion for deciding whether a statement like A stands for A or the sentence P designates the proposition that P is true or not. And there's no way to decide whether a certain sign is meaningful either. Pour Ferdinand Saussure. Saucire. But usually we are not all troubled by such questions. We talk and solve problems without being troubled by the fact that there is apparently no possibility of deciding whether or not we are acting reasonably, whether or not we are talking sense. Sense. But isn't that rather paradoxical? Paradoxical. Isn't it rather paradoxical to assume that a sign which we constantly use to convey, as we think, important information is really without meaning, and that we have no possibility of discovering that fact? And since its being meaningless apparently does not at all affect its usefulness in discourse, doesn't that show that the presuppositions of the paradox, in particular G1 and G2, need reconsideration? Reconsideration. A great deal of the philosophical investigations is devoted to this task. The phenomena of language are first studied in primitive kinds of application in which one can command a clear view of the aim and functioning of words. The primitive and rudimentary languages which are investigated in the course of these studies are called language games. Let us consider one such language game. It is meant to serve for communication between a builder A and an assistant B.
Assistant B.
B. A is building with building stones. There are blocks, pillars, slabs, and beams. B has to pass the stones, and that in the order in which A needs them. For this purpose, they use a language consisting of words block, pillar, slab, beam, beam, beam. A calls them out. B brings the stone which he has learned to bring at such and such a call. Conceive this as a complete primitive language. Consider first of all, how A prepares B for the purpose he is supposed to fulfill. Fulfill. An important part of the training will consist in the teachers pointing to the objects, directing the assistant's attention to them, and at the same time uttering a word.
Uttering a word.
A word. For instance, the word slab, as he points to that shape. This procedure cannot be called an ostensive definition. Because the assistant, who at the beginning is supposed to be without any knowledge of any language, cannot yet ask what the name is. Indeed. Which shows that teaching a language can be looked at as adjusting a mechanism to respond to a certain kind of influence. Finally, the assistant is able to play the game. He is able to carry out the orders given to him by the builder, A. Let us now imagine that A teaches B more complicated orders. Orders which contain color names, number words, for instance, 4 red slabs. And even orders which contain what one would be inclined to call descriptions.
Descriptions.
Give me the slab lying just in front of you, etc. Now, what do the words of this language signify? What is supposed to show what they signify, if not the kind of use they have? And we have already described that. So we are asking for the expression, this word signifies this. Well, go look for that one. To be made part of the description. In other words, the description ought to take the form the word signifies. But assimilating the descriptions of the uses of words in this way cannot make the uses themselves any more like one another. For as we see, they are absolutely unlike. Unlike. Compare, for instance, the way in which the word for is used with the way in which the word slab is used within the language game in question. The difference in the uses of the two words comes out most clearly when we compare the procedures by means of which the respective uses are taught. Taught. A child who is to count correctly has first to learn the series of numerals by heart. He has then to learn how to apply this knowledge to the case of counting. For instance, the number of apples in a basket. Yummy, nummy. I should have brought an apple, I realize now. In doing so, he has to say that the series of cardinal numbers, and for each number, he has to take out one apple out of the basket, and he has to be careful not to count one apple twice or to miss an apple. Miss an apple. How are we buying apples today? Maybe. The numeral, which according to this procedure is coordinated with the last apple, is called the number of apples in the basket. This is how the use of numerals is taught, and how numerals are used in counting. Compare with this the use of the word like slab. It is taught by simple ostension. Ostension. The word slab is repeatedly uttered in the presence of a slab. Finally, the child is able to identify slabs correctly within the language game it has been taught. Taught. Nothing is involved which has any similarity to the counting procedure which was described above. Nothing is involved which has any similarity to the counting procedure which was described above. The application of the word itself to a concrete object is much simpler than the application of a number word to a collection whose cardinal number cannot be seen at a glance. Glance. This application does not involve any complicated technique. A person who understands the meaning of slab is able to apply this word quite immediately. Immediately. Let us now imagine that somebody following T1 should argue in this way. It is quite clear. Slab signifies slabs, and 3 signifies 3.
Oh no.
Oh, yeah. Every word in a language signifies something. According to Wittgenstein, he has so far said nothing whatever unless he has explained exactly what distinction he wishes to make. To make. It might be, of course, that he wanted to distinguish the words of our language game from the words without meaning. Without meaning. Imagine someone saying, all tools serve to modify something. Thus, the hammer modifies the position of the nail, the saw, the shape of the board, and so on. And what is modified by the rule, the glue pot, the nails, our knowledge of the thing's length and the temperature of the glue and the solidity of the board. Would anything be gained by this assimilation of expressions? Our example and its interpretation suggests an instrumentalist theory of language. The orders which A gives to B are instruments in getting B to act in a certain way. Well, that's rather the zest of it. To act in a certain way. What else would it be? Their meaning depends on how B is supposed to act in situations in which they are uttered. It seems reasonable to extend this theory, which is a corollary to T, soon to be described, to language games which contain descriptive sentences as well. The meaning of a descriptive sentence would then consist in its role in certain situations, more generally within a certain culture. Wittgenstein has drawn this consequence, which is another corollary of T. T. Wittgenstein, to be precise. What we call descriptions are instruments for particular uses. Yes. Think of a machine drawing which directs the production of the machine drawn in a certain way. A cross section and an elevation with measurements which an engineer has before him. Before him. Thinking of a description as a word picture has something misleading about it. One tends to think only of such pictures as hang on the walls, which seem simply to portray how a thing looks, what it is like. These pictures are, as it were, idle. Idle, lazy.
Pictures are idle, lazy. Aya, baya. Pictures, you're lazy. Lazy pictures.
And quite generally, language is an instrument.
Instrument.
Its concepts are instruments.
Instrument.
This idea has an important consequence. Instruments are described by referring to how they work. There are different kinds of instruments for different purposes.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Indeed. And there is nothing corresponding to the ethereal meanings which, according to T1, are supposed to make meaningful the use of all instruments alike. Let the use of the words teach you their meaning is to be substituted for T4, and this now seems to be a new theory, T. Wittgenstein. Indeed. But in order to appreciate the full importance of T. Wittgenstein, we have first of all to consider the following objections, which seem to be inevitable. Inevitable. What to do? In talking, ordering, describing, we certainly use words and get other people to act in a certain way. To revise their plans, which we show to be unreasonable, to obey our wishes, to follow a certain route, which we point out to them on a map. But the description of the meaning of the elements of a language game is not exhausted by pointing to the way in which we use those elements and the connection of this use with our actions and other people's. For in uttering the words and the sentences, we mean something by them. We want to express our thoughts, our wishes, etc. It is our meaning, that gives sense to the sentence.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Thank God. And meaning, it is something in the sphere of the mind. What we mean seems to be independent of the way we use our words and the way other people react to our utterances. Moreover, the meanings of our utterances being hidden beneath the surface of various ways in which we use their elements can only be discovered by looking at the mental picture. The presence of which indicates what we mean by them. A person who wants to understand has, therefore, to grasp this mental picture. One would like to say, telling brings it about that somebody else knows that I am in pain, for example. It produces this mental phenomenon. Everything else, in particular whether he does something further with it as well. As well. That, for instance, looks for a physician in order to help me, is inessential to the telling. Only in the act of understanding is it meant that we are able to do this. This order, why, that is nothing but sounds, ink marks. Meaning and understanding are therefore mental processes. Apparently, this idea makes it necessary to give an account of meaning which is independent of the description of the way in which signs are used within a certain language game. Another great part of the philosophical investigations is devoted to showing that this is not the case. A careful analysis of the way we use phrases such as A intends to, A means that, A suddenly understands that, shows that in trying to account for this use, we are again thrown back on description, on the way we use certain elements of the language game in which those expressions occur, and the connection of this use with our actions, and other people's. And other people's would be the pause signal here. Other people.
The people's page 464.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. 464.
There are some quotes here. Let's go look for them. I think already at page 459, if we might go there.
Not there already.
Well, if we have this idea that there is an MRP, mental reading process, then it would actually be a miracle that different people who are reading the same text agree in the sounds they utter would be miraculous. This is about 8 lines from the bottom. I think that's an extraordinary good point against the inner reading process. For if everybody had their own private reading process, how would it be that they all sound similar so they can understand each other? As now I talk, I hope I make sense to others. That wouldn't be possible if I constantly invented my own language. Another argument is, and that's the last sentence here, rather long one, Feyerabend, why so long sentences? It leads also to the substitution of miracles for an everyday affair. It leads also to the substitution for a simple process, uttering sounds in the presence of printed paper, like here, of a more complicated one, listening to inner voices in the presence of printed paper. That is, it misses the aim of explaining the process of reading. It doesn't even explain reading. Actually, inner reading process or inner thinking process doesn't explain anything at all. It does not have any explanatory power whatsoever. It's empty. Yes. Empty. Empty vessel. On the next page, 460, second paragraph, and we are something like 7 lines down. or 5. There is no criterion for deciding whether a statement like A stands for A or the sentence P designates the proposition that P is true or not. There is no way to decide whether a certain sign is meaningful either. None whatsoever. But usually we are not troubled by such questions. Yes, because we go on. And I think of Saussure here because he has no means whatsoever to explain how sign connects to signified. None. He doesn't have any connective power whatsoever. His sayings are empty. They do not yield. They do not give. We go further to page 461. In the slab example, whether there is a child or an assistant, we can see on the third paragraph, 5 lines down, this procedure cannot be called an ostensive definition because the assistant who at the beginning is supposed to be without any knowledge of any language cannot as yet ask what the name is. Before language, we can't even understand what a name is. That takes language. The pointing procedure is nothing simple. It can only be learned in the context of doing things, complicated things. If you go to the quote here further down, beginning with now. So here is a interesting, would it help, like in the mental reading process, to say that this word signifies this, a sort of a definition, either by ostension or the second rule by adding things? Would that help?
No.
Hardly. And it's very close to chirality because it needs to be shown, it needs to be done. We need to be in the act of doing things to understand whether the chirality is left or right. In the same way, we need to be in the act of doing things to understand what slab is, or a pillar, or a stone, all those things. None of them become clear by themselves. It is in the act of doing. And I would compare that to explaining something like Paternoster, like my great grandfather used to know in Latin. It's a doing, it's the act. It's not the perceived mental content that we would call meaning, and transferring it to something else might rid it of its meaning, just like the word slab, once explained, can lose its sense. Pater noster, qui et in caelum, sanctificetur nomen tuum. We go to page 462. The fourth line here, if you may, yeah. The numeral, and we take it into counting here. And I think this is quite simple, nothing complicated, but very strong. The numeral, which according to this procedure is coordinated with the last apple, is called the number of apples in the basket. So the last numeral of the act of counting may be bringing the apples from a paper bag, for instance, into a basket. The last numeral is the count of what's in the basket. It's an act of doing things. Nothing would be gained to add intention, Saussurian signified, or sign, or the idea of intention, extension, or semantics. None of it would help, even the slightest. And later down, we get another sharp argument here. Another quote. It's the second part of that quote, or maybe there are two different quotes. The two differences. Imagine someone saying all tools serve to modify something. Thus, the hammer modifies the position of the nail, the saw the shape of the board, and so on. To say that all words have meaning is similar. It doesn't add anything. It adds confusion. And although it sounds good on the surface to say all tools serves to modify something, it is meaningless. It's empty. All tools, they have a family resemblance, but they have nothing hidden, undercover, non-active in common. Nothing would be gained. So you can call the orders also instruments, like a tool. To say slab is a sort of instrument. The orders which A gives to B are instruments in getting B to act in a certain way. So if I say slab to Kalle here on my side, I want him to act in a certain way. I want him to bring me a slab or put a slab or put it down. I don't just have a meaning without any context or any relation to anything. That would not serve a purpose. So why would it happen? If we go to the third paragraph here, and the fourth line, and there is nothing corresponding to the ethereal meanings which, according to T1, are supposed to make meaningful the use of all instruments alike. And I think that covers tools and words. It doesn't make any sense. We are constructing a Heyman or a phantasm, and by doing so, we create great problems by assuming that thing to be alive or doing things. So at the very end of that page, we have, moreover, the meanings of our utterances being hidden beneath the surface of the various ways in which we use their elements can only be discovered by looking at the mental pictures, the presence of which indicates what we mean by them. So these mental pictures are so redundant, I can't even find words for them. They don't explain about what reading is. They don't help reading. They don't teach reading or anything else or bring a slab. And they would actually cause great harm if they were to be established. It's a bit like you having a rucksack and you forgot about it. It's on your back, and most probably you will adapt your gait to it, and your back will bend as time goes by. I think this is somewhat, it's very similar to mind mapping or body map, I think it's called, by Barbara Conable, where we imagine there to be a joint here, therefore try to use it as a joint, which create great harm to our body, and also the joint of the waist. I don't know if anyone remember the waist joint, it was ages ago, but it's made by the belt or by the construction of the pants, and makes you believe that you can bend your body there, the imaginative waist. A mental picture is similar. It does harm. And Wittgenstein reveals what it does, reveals what it doesn't. Those things becomes clear. Kalle, please join. I will move this microphone.
For
The technical.
459. 459. This meaning our assumption that reading is a mental act leads therefore to the substitution of miracles for an everyday affair. I don't want to read too much into this phrase. But could it mean what I think it could mean? That if you believe in mental processes, that they are real, that eliminates miracles out there, or how should we interpret this phrase?
Well, you can rewrite it to say that the mental processes are useless. They don't exist. We say they don't exist. So how could they cause anything? Well, what they do is take away our free will. I think you can replace mental processes with determinism, actually. There's a pretty hard blow to determinism. It's miraculous in a bad way.
Our assumption that reading is a mental act leads therefore to the substitution of miracles for an everyday affair. Why not?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it doesn't, our private language doesn't cause anything.
It doesn't cause anything, and I don't. What is that? It doesn't cause anything, and I don't need it to read. All what I need to do is to have learned how to read, train how to read, and then read. There's nothing extra there. And we know that somehow. So the reason why MRP, or the mental process, comes out is that we haven't thought about these things before. Wittgenstein is the first. And to be specific, in the beginning, he didn't think about this either. His first 45 years, it was not something that he thought of.
And perhaps the miraculous is in the thing that that we are able to focus on reading, but at the same time be aware of the boiling milk.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then this time I didn't have much.
Did you like that one with Saussure? I think it's a rather strong argument against Saussure.
Which page?
It's page 460.
16. Okay.
And it's A stands for ace of the sentence P designates the proposition that P is true or not. There is no way to decide whether a certain sign is meaningful either. Saussure never explains the connection between sign and signified. Everything is happening in a transcendental world. Whereas Wittgenstein points to it directly, says, this is how we do things. We want something to happen. This is the true nature of language, which has been hidden from view, just in front of our eyes, I would say.
And let me see this next page about the assistant, who equals child.
Oh, and some other examples, he's a child.
Yes. So Wittgenstein, or Feyerabend perhaps, claims that this procedure cannot be called an authentic definition, because assistant, who at the beginning is supposed to be without any knowledge of any language, cannot as yet ask what the name is.
No. It means that to know what a name is extraordinarily complicated. And if you don't have a language, you don't know what a name is. So you need to learn what a name is, and that will take months, years maybe. This is something that Augustine didn't think of. I think that you can take the child and you just point at the chair and says chair, and the child would understand what a name is. Oh, that thing is named a chair. No, it takes at least 3 years for a child to understand that. In the beginning, a child is just, how do you say, doodling, blah, 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 blah. And then later imitating what people are saying, and then doing things in context.
Yes, we could also call offensive definition equals Saussure's method,
Yeah.
since sign points at the signified.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely. Yes. In some transcendental way, it's pointing and it's supposed to be absolutely obvious for everyone. He doesn't even bring in the reader or our people into the game. There's nobody doing anything in the Saussurian thought. Everything is transcendental. It's not on the ground.
So there is this mysterious hand of God, or almost like in Michelangelo's painting. Imagine the hand of God pointing. So you have that in one way active thing. So you do have that in Augustine and on Saussure, but we could say actually that it's only a hand if there is nobody actually looking at it. And there is even not. Oh yes, you do have somebody who points. You had a card, the card who represents the father who teaches the child.
Yes.
So the father could point. Let me see. Yes, the father is pointing at something. This is a share, but it's only this pointing. It doesn't say how it's used.
What a name is, how do you use a name which takes 3 years for a child to learn? Minimum. A little small thing that Augustine forgot. But of course, if you know what a name is, like in the Michelangelo painting, all people know that, we are grown up, we can look at the painting, then it becomes very, very important. Massive, I would say.
Yes, perhaps we could also say that the hand in Saussure Augustine is like the policeman who winks to us. We have to stop. It's that kind of, but it still implies usage, that you have already knowledge what it means.
Yeah, in that case, we have knowledge what the policeman means. Yeah. What do you say?
Yes, let's end there.
Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, for participating. I hope you could hear this, and I wish everyone a very pleasant day, evening or afternoon or night, wherever you are. Thank you very much. Bye bye for now.